Today, I'm going to be building an extremely deadly house. Greetings friends, Khaios here. In the last video, I built a very fragile house. If you missed that video, be sure to check it out. Today, I'm going to be building a very solid house that will instead make the occupant fragile. I can think of the perfect location to build a house this lethal. This will be the perfect biome for the job. Now, this house, similar to the fragile house, will have a few rules for me to follow. Firstly, the house must be a valid one. You should be able to set your spawn inside of it, and NPCs should be free to move in. Second, it must look decent. I could make a lethal box house out of spikes, but what's the fun in that? Lastly, I don't just want the house to instantly kill anyone inside of it. With the most fragile house, you could use it without breaking it if you were careful. Similarly, I want this house to be livable without instantly killing you. You just have to be careful. So I'm going to make this house lethal if you make missteps, but it won't harm you if you're just standing around. So with those guidelines in place, let me go back to my corporeal form. In terms of materials, there are quite a few blocks that are dangerous to the player. Spikes, wooden spikes, meteorite, hailstone brick, and hellstone all damage the player when they come into contact with the block, and they either apply the bleeding or burning debuffs. Sand can harm you when it's falling, but it can also harm you when you're standing inside of it, as you instantly begin suffocating. All of the falling blocks cause falling damage, and most of them cause suffocation as well, so they could be swapped out with sand in this build, but while shell piles are affected by gravity, they do not cause suffocation, so I'm not going to be using them here. Hive block is another dangerous tile that I won't be using today. It releases bees that can harm you, but only when you're breaking the block. Since I intend for this house to be sturdy, not broken, the hive won't be dangerous here, and I'll be leaving it out. I will also be leaving out various items that are dangerous to the player, but can only be used once, or if they're fragile, such as TNT barrels, explosives, rolling cacti, and beehives. Things that are reusable, such as the various different traps, will be used throughout the house, however. This can also include any of the summoning statues, but I think I'm going to be just sticking to the boulder statue for this. Lava can also work throughout the house in various places as long as it doesn't interfere with placing furniture and doesn't detract from the overall appearance of the build. There are also some blocks that aren't inherently lethal, but if used in the right way, they can help make the house more deadly. So I may include conveyor belts, honey block, and teleporters. Lastly, I do want this house to look as decent as possible. The fragile house was very limited in what materials I could build with because I wanted it to fall apart if the player moved around carelessly. Because of that, I couldn't use solid materials. This time, however, I have no such limitations as the house is meant to be very sturdy and far outlast the player, which it will probably kill repeatedly. So with that in mind, I'm going to allow myself to use any building blocks that I want to make it look good, as long as the house remains very dangerous, yet survivable if enough care is taken. With all of that out of the way, it's time for me to gather up my materials and head into the underworld. And while I do that, if you have any ideas for wacky houses you'd like to see me build, be sure to leave a comment down below with your suggestion. And while you're down there, if you enjoy my content, please consider leaving a like and subscribing if you haven't already. It really helps the channel gain the favor of the algorithmic overlords, so I appreciate everyone who does. Thank you. Before I jump into starting the house itself, I want to do some landscaping. The underworld doesn't exactly have the best looking terrain generation. Far from it. So first and foremost, I'm going to scrape away any of the ash blocks in my build area, drain the lava, and landscape a new terrain to build the house on, using primarily gray painted sandstone. For now, it's going to be pretty rough, an unfinished area. I need to essentially set the canvas for my house. Eventually there will be ash grass, some plants, cave walls, lava pools, and maybe a few other things to finish off the landscape, but that will come later in the build. For now, I'm going to leave it with this. Alright, the landscape is roughly laid out, but I'm not too sure about the current background. Don't get me wrong, I really like this background, as I like all of the newish, the more current hell backgrounds. I just feel like one of the others might feel better for the environment here a bit more. I like this one, but I think it might be a bit too bright, so I'm going to go back to the last one. Yeah, I'm happy with this. We're going to keep it. Now I'm going to move on to the foundation, or perhaps I should say foundations. I'm kind of getting the feeling that I want to break this house up into 2 or 3 smaller segments connected with sky bridges. I'm not quite sure on that yet. I'm going to tinker around with starting my foundations and fixing any landscaping that I need to make them fit, so let me do that real quick. For now, I'm going to be making the floors out of iron brick as well as tin and iron plating. I'll likely be changing the block choice in the floor to make it more deadly here and there. Once again, I'm going to make the outline of the general building shape that I have in mind before I get to swapping in the final blocks. I went with Gem Spark just so it's easier to see in the underworld, as it is a bit dim in this biome. I'll be sure to light up the inside and the outside of the house to help make it pop out later on, but for now it's time to think about the layout and how I want to make this house lethal. So I'm thinking the bedroom can be up here. I'm going to close off the left side of the house and just not have a door there. You want to go left? Well, sorry, I guess. The reason I don't want a door on this side of the house and to only have the exit on the other side of the house is to force more opportunities for lethality as you work your way through the structure. Essentially, I'm just being evil. I also want to separate the house into a few smaller rooms and create a couple of choke points for pain. The layout may change as I go, but I'm going to start swapping out blocks now and get this place looking good. As I said, I want the house to be survivable if you're careful, so the floors will mostly be safe. Or at least have pockets of safe, I'm not sure yet. But the side walls, those should absolutely incorporate hellstone brick, so you are set on fire anytime you walk into one. I'm thinking of having a line of crimtane brick running up the center of the side walls with alternating palladium column and hellstone brick. That way it's not entirely a hellstone structure, it'll look more interesting, but it will still burn you no matter where you touch it. On second thought, I'm not too happy with this. I'll have to experiment around some more with materials until I find a combination that I am happy with. 1 second. Okay, this is much better. We're going with ancient hellstone brick with palladium column and a line of iron brick running up the center. Now the wall is quite hot to the touch, which I think is very fitting, as I imagine metallic walls in the underworld would literally cook you. So I'm going to go ahead and use this pattern for all of the rest of these side walls in the building. I was thinking about using crimtane brick for the top side of the roofs with some tin plating beneath them, but I'm not sure that I really like that, so for the time being I am just going to go with tin and copper plating together. The floors will just be iron brick for now. So let's get on to the next part. First off, before getting started on the walls, I didn't really like the long segment of a straight line on the left side of the building, so I'm offsetting the first floor from the second floor to give the house a more interesting shape. I don't do it during this time lapse, but I will eventually do the same thing to the second side of the building. As for the walls, just like with the fragile house, my wall choices for this house don't really make any difference whatsoever. The only unsafe walls that exist are ones that allow monsters to spawn in front of them. The issue there is that they don't count as valid backgrounds for housing requirements, so I just won't be using them. Any other wall will work just fine, so I'm just going to place whatever looks good here. Oh, and if you're wondering about the torches, they're there just to help illuminate the build for your viewing pleasure until I get around to actually lighting the area up. The walls are made of copper and tin plating, blue and green tiled brick, and wrought iron fence for the windows. At the doorways, I'm using some rich mahogany. During this build, I had a horribly evil idea regarding the doors, which I'll get to in a moment, but for now I'll wrap up the walls as well as adding a roof to the right house segment, as I didn't really like the way that the cave was coming in. I'm not entirely happy with the corner bits that are holding up the stone on the left side of the house, so I'll also edit those quickly before moving on to the next step. We already have dangerous sidewalls, but now let's make this house truly lethal. First up, I'm going to line each gap between the various floors with spikes. If your jump isn't lined up perfectly, you're going to take a little poke plus a bleeding debuff. Next, I'm thinking some hellstone bricks at this choke point. At the top of the point, there will also be a pressure plate. That pressure plate is going to cause some spears to shoot out from the walls. I'll add another one of these in the small storage room to the right. Onto the bridge, it's pretty boring for now, I know. Don't worry, I'll be improving the appearance of it later, but before I get to that, in terms of the danger for the segment, I'm going to add some grate to the bridge. I'll have some echo-coated pumps dumping out lava periodically. I'm not sure if it should be on a timer or a pressure plate or logic sensor. I'll give it some thought. Back to the gaps between the first and second floors, they are exactly 2 tiles thick, so I feel it would be perfect to hide some echo-coated boulder statues above them. Whenever you get near the gap, a boulder will fall. If you're expecting it, the boulder should be pretty easy to avoid. If you're not thinking about it, it should be a fun time. For me at least. The storage room also gave me an idea. When I go to the decorating phase and I start laying out chests, some of those chests can be trapped, and they will trigger flame traps if they are opened. I can't set those up for now, so hopefully I don't forget later. I'm also realizing that all of the top floor rooms seem to be safer than they should be, so let's spice them up. The bedroom is going to get a weighted pressure pad on the right side of the gap, which will trigger if you step on it when trying to leave. When activated, it will drop a boulder from the boulder statue. Given how low it is, there's a very good chance that you'll be using that bed again sooner than you thought. The next room over is going to have 2 geysers in it. These can be activated with wiring, but additionally, they activate when a player walks in front of them. If you inch towards one very slowly, you can actually trigger it without getting hit by the flames. Once a geyser is activated, it cannot be activated again for a few seconds, allowing you to freely pass. Creeping up and activating them can be really finicky. It almost seems to either be pixel perfect, whether you dodge the flames, or luck base. I'm not sure, so out of fairness, I will be hiding a switch in the room that can trigger them and put them on cooldown. If you forget to press it, you're out of luck. I just hope you aren't planning to be in a rush. The last room is going to have echo-coated weighted pressure pads near the ceiling. If a player jumps or flies up to the ceiling accidentally, spiky ball traps will activate, almost certainly killing anyone inside the room. In order to incentivize people into jumping up there, the step up in the middle of the room is going to be hellstone. It will be safe to jump over as long as you do a small jump, but the further edges of the ceiling will trigger the death trap, so any jump that you do will have to be very precise. Finally, every doorway is going to harm the player. A valid house doesn't necessarily need a door in it. Platforms can count as doors for that check, so I'm going to be placing platforms in every doorway. If I slope them into stair shapes, then the platforms become hoiks, which allow entities to pass through solid blocks onto the other side. If I were to actuate these platforms, you could just walk in there freely, but I'm not going to actuate them, because if you try walking into one without holding down, you are going to be pressed up into the hellstone bricks and just burn your forehead. So you must be holding the down button while walking through the door, or they'll attempt to walk up the stairs. And this also brings us to the guaranteed blood payment for entering and leaving the house. A row of echo-coated sand will be in the middle of each doorway. The platforms will allow players to walk through the sand, but because it is sand, it will suffocate you while you're inside of it, so you will take constant damage until you exit the doorway. My evil villain brain has another way of making this extra painful. There will be a conveyor block under each doorway. If you're entering the house, you'll pass through the sand faster, but if you're trying to leave, the conveyor will cause you to suffocate in the sand longer. Nobody leaves this house without the adequate blood sacrifice. And now that's all the traps, so let's get to slapping down some decorations. With the decorative time-lapse complete, I'm going to stop recording for now, finish up the landscaping, then give you all the final tour of the extremely lethal house and how it can be technically survivable if you are careful and patient enough. And here is the completed lethal house, including the landscape. It took quite a while to get those pesky vines to grow, but I think it was worth the wait. All in all, I am very happy with how this house turned out. It's very lethal, and I think it looks pretty good too. So let's take a look at all of the traps in action. As you can see, it's very deadly. Now, just to show you that it's possible, I'm going to leave the house without dying. That took quite a bit of health. Let's see if I can get back to the bed without dying. Almost. I held up when making that final jump, so I grabbed the rope instead of jumping past it, which allowed the boulder to crush me. Oops. But as you can see, this house is extremely dangerous, but if you're careful enough and you know what you're doing, you can still use it as a house, just like its fragile cousin. If you would like to check out the world for yourself, I offer my world saves as a supporter reward in Patreon, and this one will enter the folder at the start of next month. If you're curious, take a look and consider supporting the channel if you're able to. I really do appreciate everyone who does. Leave a comment telling me what you think of the house, and if you have any suggestions for other strange houses you'd like to see me build. A huge thank you to my biggest supporter for the month. Sarcasm not intended. And be sure to check out my channel artist MythicalWater, linked in the description below. Thank you all very much for watching. Be back soon with a new video. Happy building.